Hey there, fellow wine enthusiasts. Ready to uncork a fascinating story with me today?
Always up for a good wine tale.
Today, we're taking a deep dive into the world of Robert Parker.
Ah, the Emperor of Wine.
Yeah, the man who basically built a wine empire with his taste buds.
It's amazing how influential he's been.
So we've got biographies, articles, even snippets from Parker himself.
Oh, you know you love those primary sources.
I do. Gives us a nice paper trail to follow, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So, where do we even start with a guy like Parker?
Well, what fascinates me is how he changed the way we think about wine. This guy was a lawyer.
No kidding. Zero formal wine training.
And he became arguably the most important wine critic in the world.
It really makes you wonder, how does that even happen?
Right. From courtroom arguments to swirling and sniffing.
Quite the career change.
But see, this isn't just about one man's journey, fascinating as it is.
No, it goes way beyond that.
We're going to explore how Parker's taste literally shaped what we find in wine shops today.
His palate had a global impact.
It's crazy to think about. So buckle up, folks, because we're going to unpack how Parker's scores moved markets.
Oh yeah, we're talking about whether he pushed wineries towards a single Parker style.
And what his legacy is now that he's retired.
Should be a good one.
Okay, first things first. We got to rewind back to Parker's early days.
Back to the beginning.
What I find really interesting is he didn't come from a wine family.
Not a long lineage of vintners,
No generations of vineyard knowledge, no barrels in the basement.
Nope. Just a regular American upbringing, born in Baltimore in 1947.
And, get this, he started out as a lawyer.
A lawyer, can you imagine?
Now that you mention it, I can kind of see it, you know?
How so?
That sharp mind, the attention to detail, maybe even a touch of courtroom drama in those tasting notes.
Maybe some lawyers would say there's a certain structure lacking in some wines, just like an argument.
Haha, good one.
But in all seriousness, the real turning point for Parker happened during a trip to France in 1967.
Ooh la la, France.
He was visiting his girlfriend in Alsace at the time.
Romance and wine, what a perfect pairing.
It was in Alsace that he had his first real experience with good wine.
Alsatian wine, so that's even before the Burgundy obsession.
Right, it was his first love, so to speak, and not just any Burgundy, mind you.
These were the good stuff.
These were the classic, elegant, complex Burgundies, the real deal.
The kind that make you go, ooh la la, huh?
Exactly. These wines are what they call terroir-driven.
Terroir, that's a fancy word.
It means they really reflect the unique characteristics of where the grapes are grown.
The soil, the climate, all that.
Every little detail, it all gets captured in the wine.
So it was love at first sip for Parker, huh?
You could say so. And this is where things get really interesting to me.
Do tell.
Parker was completely self-taught.
Really? No fancy sommelier courses.
Nope, no winemaking degrees or anything.
He was just a guy with a curious palate and a thirst for knowledge, literally.
Oh, right. Just goes to show you don't need a fancy title to become an expert.
I love that. It's all about passion and experience.
Absolutely. Now, even though he was self-taught, he did have a couple of key mentors in those early days.
Who were they?
Well, there was Hubert de Monti and Michel Bétain.
Okay, I've heard of those names. De Monti, he was a Burgundian winemaker, right?
That's the one. A bit of a traditionalist, you could say.
So old school methods.
Very much so. Minimal intervention in the vineyard and the winery.
Letting the grapes do their thing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
He believed in letting the land speak for itself.
You know, that's really aligned with what a lot of people are talking up today with natural wines.
It's fascinating how these philosophies come full circle.
And Bétain, he was a French wine critic, right?
That's right.
Didn't he have something to do with how Parker developed his, descriptive language for wine?
You're spot on. Bétain was known for his precise vocabulary.
Making those subtle flavors come to life with words.
Exactly. He could articulate the nuances of flavor and aroma like nobody else. It's not enough to just say a wine is fruity, you know?
You gotta paint a picture.
You need the words to make people really understand what they're tasting.
I can see how that would have been huge for Parker.
It really shaped his writing style.
You know, you're making me realize how much I rely on those vivid descriptions when I'm choosing a bottle at the store.
It's like a sneak peek into what the wine will taste like.
It gets me excited to try it.
That's the power of good wine writing.
And back then, this was before the internet, right?
Oh yeah, pre-internet days.
So getting reliable information about wine wasn't as easy as it is now.
No, not at all.
Which makes 1978 such a pivotal year. Because that's when Parker launched The Wine Advocate.
His own independent newsletter.
Yep, completely independent, no influence from wineries or advertisers, just his unfiltered opinions.
It was a bold move.
Kind of like starting a blog before blogs even existed.
It was groundbreaking, really.
And this is also where the famous 100-point scale comes in.
The love it or hate it system of the wine world.
You either swear by it or you think it's totally bogus.
And you can't deny its impact.
It changed how we buy wine, how we talk about wine, everything.
It was revolutionary for its time.
Suddenly, you didn't need to be some kind of fancy sommelier to figure out if a wine was good.
90 points or above meant you were in for a treat.
And if a bottle got a perfect 100,
That was like hitting the jackpot.
prices would go through the roof like those limited edition sneakers everyone wants.
It's true. But the 100-point system, it wasn't all sunshine and roses.
No. Were there downsides?
Well, it sparked some debate over the years.
What kind of debate?
On the one hand, the 100-point scale made wine knowledge more accessible, right?
Yeah, everyday drinkers could suddenly figure out what to buy.
Exactly. But on the other hand, some people worried that winemakers would start tailoring their wines just to please Parker's palate.
Trying to get those high scores.
Exactly. Which brings us to the infamous Parker style.
Ah, it's the style that got those coveted high scores.
And it wasn't exactly subtle.
So what are we talking about here? Paint me a picture of a Parker-style wine.
Okay, imagine bold, ripe, almost jammy fruit flavors.
Okay, I'm with you.
And often a noticeable influence from new oak barrels.
That vanilla spice toasty kind of thing.
Exactly. A very rich and concentrated style.
It sounds delicious.
It can be. But it also raises a question. Did Parker's influence push wineries to sacrifice their unique regional character?
In pursuit of those high scores?
That's the heart of the controversy.
Did everyone start trying to make the same kind of wine?
It's a valid question.
Like, imagine if every musician tried to write the same hit song.
Even though they have their own unique voices.
That would be boring.
It would be. And, to be fair to Parker, his own palate did evolve over time.
It did.
He started to appreciate more freshness and balance in wines, not just pure power.
He was open to change.
He was. But the Parker effect was already in motion.
He'd already changed the game.
And nowhere was this effect felt more strongly than in Burgundy.
Back to Parker's first wine love.
The region that captured his heart.
Before we get too deep into Burgundy, I'm curious about something. We talked about Parker's first wine love in Alsace.
Right. Those Alsatian wines.
They're known for being aromatic and complex, kind of balanced.
Very different from those big, bold reds he became famous for.
So do you think those early experiences in Alsace maybe, broadened his palate?
It's a good question, and it often gets overlooked.
Did they help him appreciate a wider range of styles?
I think that's very possible. We tend to think of Parker as this champion of power and concentration.
Right, that's kind of his thing.
But his appreciation for finesse and balance was always there, even if it emerged more prominently later on.
So it was there all along.
It was. And you're right, Alsace is known for wines that have this beautiful play between sweetness and acidity.
A real dance on the palate.
Exactly.
You're making me want to revisit some Alsatian wines.
You should.
Okay, but back to Burgundy and those pivotal mentors we were talking about. You mentioned Hubert de Monti.
The traditionalist winemaker.
I'm picturing him walking through his vineyards, carefully observing each vine.
That's a pretty accurate image.
Did Parker's time with him solidify that respect for the natural expression of grapes?
Absolutely. De Monti's was all about minimal intervention.
That hands-off approach.
He believed in letting nature do its work.
It's funny how that's becoming more and more popular today.
It is. A lot of winemakers are embracing organic or biodynamic practices.
Yep. Back to the roots.
Full circle, you could say.
And then there was Michel Batagne, the, wordsmith of wine critics.
He had a way with words.
I bet Parker learned a lot about the power of precise language from him.
Without a doubt.
That
Batagne had this amazing ability to transport you to the tasting room with his words.
Really?
You could practically smell the aromas and taste the nuances just by reading his descriptions.
Wow.
He taught Parker that writing about wine is like painting a picture.
It's funny, when I think back to some of the wines I've loved, I can almost always remember a specific phrase or image that captured the experience.
Like what?
Maybe it was sun-warmed raspberries or forest floor after the rain.
Those little details that make a wine come alive.
They really stick with you.
That's the magic of language.
It takes a simple tasting note and turns it into an experience.
And Parker, he really took that to heart.
You can tell he was passionate about it.
Oh yeah, even when he was critiquing a wine, His writing was always engaging.
Full of personality.
And that passion, it's contagious. Whether you agreed with him or not, you couldn't deny his enthusiasm.
He made wine exciting.
He did. It was
Yeah.
something to be discussed and debated.
Not just for stuffy tasting rooms.
Exactly.
Speaking of which, let's go back to the launch of the Wine Advocate in '78.
A big year.
Starting an independent newsletter in a pre-internet world, that was a bold move.
It was.
Why do you think it was so successful?
Well, as we said earlier, reliable information about wine was scarce back then.
It was like a secret source of wine wisdom.
Delivered straight to your mailbox.
And of course, there's that 100-point scale.
The system that launched 1,000 debates.
But it was simple, easy to understand, and undeniably influential.
It was.
I mean, a high score from Parker could send a wine's price skyrocketing.
Like a stamp of approval from the emperor himself.
It's like when a movie gets a rave review from a famous critic.
Everyone rushes to see it.
It creates buzz.
Absolutely.
But let's be real, the 100-point system, it had its pros and cons.
Definitely. It made wine criticism more democratic, but it also put a lot of emphasis on scores.
Some would say too much emphasis.
It's true. Some people argue it led to a focus on points rather than a true appreciation for wine.
Like judging a book by its Amazon rating.
That's a perfect analogy.
You might get a general idea, but you're missing out on the nuances.
Exactly. The things that make a book or a wine truly unique.
A score can be a helpful starting point, but it shouldn't be the end of the story.
Agreed.
Speaking of stories, let's get back to that Parker style we were talking about.
Yeah, those big, bold wines.
We've talked about the ripe fruit and the oak influence, but I'm wondering how that actually translated into, like, winemaking practices.
Well, if you were a winemaker trying to appeal to Parker's preferences, you might have made some specific choices in the vineyard and the winery.
Like what?
For example, you might harvest the grapes later in the season.
To get that ripe fruit flavor.
Exactly. Riper grapes have more sugar, which means higher alcohol and more intense fruit flavors in the wine.
So it's not just about the grape variety, but also about when you pick the grapes.
It's all connected.
That's fascinating. What else?
Oak aging is another key factor. New oak barrels, especially French oak, they impart flavors like vanilla, spice, and toast.
The classic Parker-style flavors.
Precisely. And there's a whole science behind it.
Really?
Oak contains compounds called tannins and lactones.
Okay, getting a little technical here.
But as the wine ages in the barrel, those compounds get extracted into the wine, adding complexity and those signature oaky notes.
So the more new oak you use, the more oaky the wine will taste.
Generally speaking, yes. And all these choices, they can have a ripple effect.
What do you mean?
Well, if everyone is chasing ripe fruit and lots of new oak, it could lead to less diversity in wine styles overall.
Like everyone wearing the same outfit?
Exactly.
Yeesh.
Even if it doesn't suit everyone's taste.
So was there a backlash against this, like, Parkerization of wine?
There were definitely some dissenting voices.
Winemakers who felt like Parker was pushing everyone in the same direction?
Some felt that his influence was leading to a homogenization of wine, with less emphasis on regional character.
It's like losing the unique flavors of different places.
That's a good way to put it.
And to be fair, Parker himself evolved over time, right?
He did. In his later years, he started to appreciate more elegance and freshness in wines.
More than just power?
More than just power. He even championed some producers who were known for a more minimalist approach.
The kind of winemakers who let the terroir shine through.
Exactly.
So he wasn't just stuck in one way of thinking.
He was open to change.
And that's important to remember.
It is. Taste is subjective, and it can change over time.
What you loved 10 years ago might not be your go-to today.
And that's okay. The beauty of wine is its diversity, its ability to offer something for everyone.
I love that perspective. It's about the journey, not the destination.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Now, are you ready to dive into Parker's love affair with Burgundy?
Oh, absolutely. Bring on the Burgundy. We've talked about his early encounters with those elegant Burgundies, but I want to hear about the specifics.
The juicy details.
The producers he loved, the wines he championed, how his pronouncements shaped Burgundy.
It's a fascinating story.
Okay, let's start with a little background. Burgundy, it's a region steeped in tradition,
It is.
complex hierarchy of vineyards, meticulous winemaking, and of course those world-renowned Pinot Noirs and Chardonnays.
The heart of Burgundy.
I've always been a little intimidated by Burgundy, honestly. It
Okay,
seems
fair.
complicated. All those different appellations and classifications.
It can definitely feel overwhelming at first.
It's a lot to take in.
But that complexity is also part of what makes Burgundy so fascinating. Each vineyard, each appellation has its own story to tell.
Okay, so picture this. Young Robert Parker, fresh out of law school, traveling through Burgundy, tasting these legendary wines for the first time.
I can see it now.
What do you think captivated him?
I think he was drawn to the elegance, the complexity, the sense of history that you find in Burgundy wines.
That je ne sais quoi.
Exactly. And remember, Parker initially favored those big, bold, fruit-forward styles.
Right, those are his jam.
And certain Burgundies, particularly those from warmer vintages or certain areas, they could deliver that power and structure he loved.
So his palate was kind of primed for those bolder expressions of Pinot Noir.
You could say that.
Interesting. So he found a kindred spirit in those robust Burgundies.
He did. And as he tasted more and more, his understanding of the region grew, and he became fascinated by this concept of terroir.
That magical connection between the land and the wine.
Precisely. How the soil, the climate, everything about the vineyard is reflected in the wine.
It's like a snapshot of a place.
That's a great way to think about it.
So how did Parker's love for Burgundy translate into his writing and his scores?
Well, he wasn't afraid to call out producers who he felt were straying from tradition or sacrificing quality for quantity.
He was known for his honesty, sometimes brutal honesty.
That's putting it mildly. His critiques often sparked debate.
He wasn't afraid to ruffle some feathers.
Not at all. But you know what? His critiques also forced producers to think critically about their practices.
To step up their game.
Exactly. They had to strive for excellence because they knew Parker was watching.
He was a champion for quality.
He was, even if it meant challenging the status quo.
And of course, there were certain producers that he consistently praised.
The wines he considered benchmarks of Burgundy.
The ones that made him go, ooh la la.
And his endorsements, they could make or break a winery.
That much influence?
That's the power of Parker.
Okay, I'm ready for some name dropping. Who are at the top of Parker's Burgundy list?
Well, one name that always comes up is Domaine de la Romanée-Conti, or DRC as it's often called.
DRC, I've heard whispers about their wines.
They're legendary.
The unicorns almost?
Their wines are produced from some of the most sought-after vineyards in Burgundy.
I bet they're incredibly expensive.
That's an understatement. We're talking tens of thousands of dollars a bottle.
Whoa, that's more than my car.
They're highly sought after by collectors.
That like the Mona Lisa of wine?
It's a good analogy.
And Parker, he loved DRC, right?
He did. He consistently awarded them perfect or near-perfect scores.
So his praise definitely contributed to their, like, astronomical prices.
I'd say so.
It's crazy how much influence he had.
DRC is a perfect example of that. Now, another producer that Parker consistently championed was Domaine Leroy.
Okay, I've heard of him too, a biodynamic, right?
That's right. They believe in working in harmony with nature, using lunar cycles and all that.
It's like a holistic approach to winemaking.
It is. And Domaine Leroy is led by this incredible woman, Lalou Leroy.
She's a bit of a legend herself.
Oh, absolutely. A true visionary in the wine world.
I love that.
Their wines are known for their purity, their intensity, and their ability to truly capture the essence of the terroir.
You know, it's interesting that Parker loved Domaine Leroy.
Why is that?
Because it shows that he wasn't just about those big, powerful wines.
Good point.
He also appreciated elegance, finesse, a respect for nature.
It speaks to the evolution of his palate.
That he was open to different styles.
Exactly. And of course, his praise for Domaine Leroy helped them gain even more recognition.
So he was shaping the landscape of Burgundy in more ways than one.
He was. And it wasn't just about the big names either.
Oh, he also had his eye on the smaller guys.
He wasn't afraid to shine a spotlight on those hidden gems.
Wineries that were making exceptional wines but flying under the radar.
Exactly.
So for someone like me who's just starting to explore Burgundy, Parker's reviews could be like a treasure map.
Guiding you to those undiscovered gems.
That's a great way to think about it.
He was a true advocate for the wines he believed in.
And he wasn't afraid to share his discoveries with the world.
That's part of his legacy.
So we've seen Parker go from a novice wine lover to this powerful tastemaker.
A true force in the wine world.
His palate shaped winemaking trends, and his love affair with Burgundy left a mark on the region.
An indelible mark.
But what happens when the emperor steps down from his throne?
That's the big question.
Did the world of wine suddenly change overnight?
That's what we'll explore next.
So we've been on this incredible journey with Robert Parker, the self-taught wine enthusiast who became a global tastemaker.
The emperor of wine.
But in 2019, the emperor decided to abdicate retire from his throne of tasting.
Big changes in the wine world.
Did everyone suddenly ditch those big, bold wines and toss out the 100-point scale?
Not exactly. I mean, Parker's retirement definitely marked a shift, but his impact is undeniable.
We've spent this whole deep dive talking about his influence.
His preferences, how they shaped winemaking, even how his own palate evolved.
We've been speaking Parkerese this whole time.
Pretty much.
But what happened to the wine advocate after he retired? Did it just disappear?
It didn't vanish, no. It was sold, and a new team took over.
So, the legacy lives on.
It does. And get this, they kept the 100-point system.
Really? They didn't ditch the scores?
Yet. Seems like some things are just too ingrained to change.
Even with a new emperor or empress in charge.
Exactly. But it's not just about one person anymore.
It's not a one-man show.
Not at all. The world of wine criticism has become much more diverse.
More voices at the table.
Exactly. And that's a good thing. We're seeing new critics emerge, each with their own unique perspectives.
So it's like a chorus of opinions now.
Instead of a solo act.
And that brings up an interesting question for our listeners. And for me, honestly,
What's that?
now that we know about the Parker effect, how should we, as wine lovers, approach this whole world of wine?
It's a great question. It can feel overwhelming sometimes, right?
It can. Walking into a wine shop or browsing online, it's like, where do I even start? So many bottles, so many regions, so many scores.
It's a lot to take in.
I often just grab the bottle with the prettiest label.
I think we've all been there.
Not exactly a sophisticated approach.
Well, I have good news for you. And for all our listeners out there,
You tell.
the first rule of wine exploration: forget the rules.
Permission to ditch the snobbery. Granted.
Don't be intimidated by fancy terms or feel like you need to become an expert overnight.
Just enjoy the wine.
Exactly. The most important thing is to trust your own taste buds.
Okay, that sounds liberating, but I'm a total newbie to wine. Any practical tips for someone just starting out?
Well, I always recommend starting with what you already enjoy.
What do you mean?
Do you have a favorite fruit? A go-to dessert? Think about those flavors. They can be great guides in the world of wine.
Like a flavor map.
Exactly. So tell me, what's your weakness?
Oh, I have a major sweet tooth. If I'm craving chocolate, what kind of wine should I look for?
For chocolate, you might enjoy a Cabernet Sauvignon.
Cabernet Sauvignon. Okay. Why Cabernet?
They often have those dark fruit flavors like blackberries and plums, and sometimes even a hint of cocoa.
Ooh, that sounds decadent.
That rich profile might just satisfy your chocolate craving.
Okay, I'm taking notes. What if I'm more of a raspberry person?
Then a Pinot Noir might be your perfect match.
Pinot Noir for raspberries. Got it.
They're known for those bright red fruit flavors, often with a touch of earthiness.
Like fresh raspberries and a hint of forest floor.
You got it.
So I've got my flavor profile in mind. What's next in my wine investigation?
Don't be afraid to ask for help. Talk to the people at your local wine shop.
They can be intimidating sometimes, though.
I know, but most of them are super passionate about wine and love to help people find new things.
Okay, I'll try to channel my inner confidence.
You got this. And this is where understanding a little bit about the Parker style can actually be helpful.
Even if we're ditching the 100-point system.
Exactly. It can give you clues about what you might like or dislike.
So, like, if I know I hate those super oaky wines, I might avoid the ones that got high Parker scores back in the day.
Exactly. Those wines were often big on oak, which might not be your thing.
It's like a secret decoder ring for wine.
I love that analogy.
Any other insider tips for us aspiring wine detectives?
Let me think. Oh, here's one. Focus on regions, not just grape varieties.
What do you mean?
Each wine region has its own unique climate, soil, and traditions.
It's all about terroir, right?
Exactly. So let's say you love Sancerre.
Ooh, Sancerre, those are delicious. They're from the Loire Valley, right?
That's right. They're known for their bright acidity and minerality.
So are you saying I should explore other wines from the Loire Valley?
Precisely. You might discover you also love a dry Chenin Blanc from Vouvray or a Cabernet Franc from Chinon.
All from the Loire Valley, but each with its own personality.
It's all about exploring and discovering.
You're giving me the travel bug. A wine trip to the Loire Valley sounds amazing.
I highly recommend it. And as you taste more wines, just remember it's a journey.
Not a destination.
Take notes, pay attention to what you like and dislike, and most importantly, don't be afraid to try something new.
So many wines, so little time.
Your palate will become more refined over time, I promise.
It's like going to the gym for your taste buds.
I love that. And just like any workout, It takes time and consistency.
Be patient, be curious, and most importantly, have fun.
That's the best advice I can give.
So ditch the intimidation, embrace your inner flavor detective, and let your palate be your guide
It's like Robert Parker's final challenge to us.
to explore this amazing world of wine and find what we truly love.
Cheers to that.
And cheers to all of you listening. We hope this deep dive into the world of Robert Parker has inspired you to uncork your own wine adventures. Until next time, happy tasting.